Of all the games that are based on real-life jobs, being a lawyer is probably one of the ones that isn't high on the agenda. But Phoenix Wright's Ace Attorney is just that, a lawyer em-up that sees you stepping into the shoes of a rookie attorney solving multiple cases. It's a bizarre idea for a game, yet it's one of my favourite video game franchises of all time. Starting life out on the Game Boy Advance, the first game in the series came out all the way back in 2001 as a Japanese-only title. The game proved to be popular and a couple of sequels soon follow, but alas, those were Japan exclusives too. Fast forward to the early days of the DS, and the series finally made it over to the West with Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, a port of the 2001 GBA game but built with the DS in mind. The other two GBA sequels, Justice for All and Trials and Tribulations, also arrived on the DS as well. The DS also saw a couple of new original titles in the series called Apollo Justice and Ace Attorney Investigations. The 3DS has also seen a few Ace Attorney games as well as their spin-off with Phoenix Wright, but for the past few years the series has been a bit quiet until now with the Ace Attorney Trilogy, as it's now arrived on consoles, so let's see how it did, shall we? Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy marks the first time the series has ever made the jump to console. This trilogy consists of the first game, Ace Attorney, its sequel, Justice for All, and the final game on the GBA trilogy, Trials and Tribulations, for the PS4, Xbox One, and Switch. The game's story sees you playing as rookie lawyer Phoenix Wright, and the first case sees his best friend being accused of murdering his girlfriend. After that case, you then go on to the next case, to the next case, to the next case, solving many elaborate murders that make the accused look pretty damn guilty, yet miraculously the case unfolds with some truly strange outcomes. Each of the three games all follows Phoenix solving many different cases, but there's always an overarching plotline that is mentioned in many cases but never really known about till the final case. An example of this is the DL6 incident that is constantly mentioned about in the first game, but you never really know what happened till episode 4, where it has a major part to play in the plot. Each of the game's cases start off as pretty open and shut cases, with the accused looking pretty guilty with some pretty damning evidence, but as soon as you start picking away at the witnesses, the truth finally comes out, and what seems to be an open and shut case becomes truly bizarre and unbelievable how these crimes were ever committed. But it is a big part of the game's charm. Also, a big part of the game's charm is the many different characters that you meet throughout the game. They all have their own personality, and many are often hilarious due to the brilliant translation and animations. As for the actual gameplay now, an Ace Attorney is essentially a visual novel. You're going to read, and read a lot. I'd say 95% of the time you'll be reading the text boxes and that's it. And whilst the game does sound incredibly boring from that description, it isn't. It's an absolute blast. Gameplay is split into two sections, investigations and courtroom. You start off in most cases by doing an investigation of the crime scene. This means you're talking to witnesses and the police to gather info as well as examining the crime scene and various areas of interest for items that could prove useful for evidence. The investigation sections are probably the weakest part of the game for me. Whilst they are fun, the court is obviously where it's all at. The court sections are a blast. These sections are where the game really shines. In court, you cross-examine witnesses' statements, press them for more information, and if there are any statements are contradictory to any evidence you have, then you can object and show your evidence to prove they're lying. As court sections go on, some of the cross-examination statements do get harder, and you do have to think outside the box with some objections, but it's incredibly entertaining. Court sections gradually ramp up the tension level, and it's helped by the superb music. At the start of the court section, it's rather quiet, but once a decisive piece of evidence has been showed and puts the case in a awry, then the iconic cornered music kicks in, and man, the music is adrenaline pumping. All through the game's other 14 cases you do pretty much all the same things, but later games do add some new mechanics like looking at evidence in detail to see if you might have missed anything, to the lock system, which is a cool system that has witnesses with a few locks on the screen, and to unlock the locks you have to show evidence to a witness to finally let them open up. Apart from that, the gameplay really never changes, but honestly I don't mind, as I was having plenty of fun. I know some critics do slam the game for being too linear and offering little replayability, essentially saying once you've completed the game, there's nothing to come back for. And whilst I do agree with that statement to a point, I've already played Trials and Tribulations before this version, and playing it again, I had a blast. My attitude is these games are like a good book. You can keep going back to it time after time again as they're so enjoyable. As for the game's length, you're talking about a fairly lengthy experience. You've got 14 cases, with length times varying between 30 minutes for the starter cases all the way up to 5 to 6 hours for the final cases. So altogether, you're talking around a good 50 plus hours if you want to complete all the cases. It's a shame as this is a celebratory collection of sorts that there's no extra side content like artwork, character bios, and behind the scenes stuff like that was in the recent Mega Man collections, but hey, it's still a great value game. Presentation-wise, the Ace Attorney Trilogy looks rather nice on the big screen. It replaced the pixelated graphics that were on the DS with new smooth anime art style, and it does look lovely. I still kind of miss the pixelated art style, but that's just me. Conclusion time now, and it's great to see the Phoenix Wright series finally arriving on consoles for the first time this console generation. This trilogy collection of the first 3 games delivering 14 cases full of intense courtroom action and fun investigation sequences. With around 50 hours of crime solving to be had, the Ace Attorney trilogy provides plenty of game for your money. It's just a shame as this trilogy doesn't have any unlockable bits and pieces about the series. Nevertheless, I'm giving Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy a 9 out of 10 with the title of brilliant, and I hope we see more from this series soon. So thank you for watching my review, like, rate and subscribe, and until next time, happy gaming, bye!